Hey readers, I'm Leandra.
And I'm Danny, and we're not reading for content.
This is a monthly book club podcast dedicated to reading in depth and leaving no plot point unturned. Each month, we read one book over the course of 3 episodes, basically reading a third of the book at a time. Feel free to listen along, or better yet, read the book with us. Our first season of the book club has the theme of genre blends. A list of books and the club schedule will also be in the description. This December, we are reading The Cautious Traveler's Guide to the Wastelands by Sarah Brooks.
Today, we're going to be discussing the first 35% of the book, which is parts 1 and parts 2, roughly 112 pages if you're reading it physically.
Before we actually get into this book, though, I am really excited about an article that, Danny, you showed me. So this is our bookish bite of the week. And tell me, what is this article again?
So this is called Creature Feature by Goodreads. And I just stumbled across it one day, as we all just get lost in the Goodreads rabbit hole sometimes. And I looked up and the header of Goodreads said creature feature. And I have recently been in the mood for monster books because I read Foul Days and really enjoyed it. And so I wanted some more of that. And so I clicked on it, and it's 128 books that feature a whole bunch of different monsters and mayhem. So it had vampires and ghosts and witches and just monsters in general, shapeshifters. It was an incredible list of reads.
Yeah, honestly, there are a bunch of reads that I'm going to want to tag, keep in mind, keep in my back pocket, because even though obviously we have this small window of when spooky books are seasonal, I feel like you can read them all the time, and I am more and more getting excited. I also was pretty proud. There were a handful of titles that I have read this year, and I was like, oh, I love that this book was featured. Like, I saw The Z Word. I also saw How to Make a Horror Movie and Survive, and those were 2 books I really enjoyed this past year. So to see Goodreads feature it, to see that more readers could potentially be reading it in the future, it was really awesome. And yeah, what a great list, an exhaustive list, nearly 130 books. Yes, please.
If you guys are interested in looking at this list of books and finding some of your own interests, we will have it linked in the description down below. Well, shall we get started and discuss our book?
Let's do it.
I think first we should probably allow our audience to have a little bit of a summary just so they know the general premise of what's happening in the first third of the book. And I believe you have a summary for us.
Yeah, I'll try my best. So, with A Cautious Traveler's Guide to the Wastelands, it's important to keep in mind that this is a genre blend. But even more important is the setting. It is set in 1899 Beijing, and it opens up with our travelers getting on the train. It is multiple POV, so as we go from chapter to chapter, we're moving across different characters, and we really have 3 primary characters that we're following. The setting for this book is also predominantly on the train going from Beijing to Moscow. In this alternate history, the landscape between these 2 major cities is deemed the wasteland. And to get from one city to the other as quickly as possible, the fastest way, but also the most dangerous way, is to take the Trans-Siberian train, which is owned by the Trans-Siberia Company. Our 3 main characters so far include Zhang Weiwei. She is a 16-year-old who was born on the train, and it's really the only home that she knows. She knows every nook and cranny of the train, and she almost views the train as her parent. She is also someone who is deemed a bit of a talisman. There's a reason why she's been kept on the train for so long, and she's a bit of a good luck charm. Then we also have Marya Petrovna. Now, she is deemed our liar of the passengers. She wears mourning garb. When she arrives on the train, we learn pretty early on that she is using a false name, and her reasoning for being on the train is to really find answers, to figure out what really went on 10 months previously when a strange event occurred on the train from Moscow to Beijing to the passengers no one seems to remember, including the stewards, the staff, the engineers. no one really remembers, or supposedly doesn't remember, what actually happened on that event. It's why it's taken 10 months for the train to get back up and running. And so Marya also has a personal investment. There's a reason why she wants to know what happened 10 months ago. We will get into that. And then finally, our third POV for the moment is Henry Gray. He is a disgraced naturalist. He ended up finding some, interesting experimentation, or some kind of strange, we'll get into it. I don't really know how to describe it, but basically his discovery ended up being the laughing stock. And so he has a bit of a redemption arc. He's hoping that this train ride will be his ticket back to the top, so that all of society, especially scientific society, will respect him again. But his reasonings are quite selfish, and he's also willing to do some dangerous things to get what he wants. So I think for now, we have a pretty good understanding of what's going on, the players, their motivations. And at this point, the train is on its way to its destination, and we are experiencing days 1 through 4.
We are on our way.
We certainly are. So what have you in your reaction so far? What's something that you really want to make sure that we talk about this first section of the book?
I first off, I've really enjoyed my time in the book so far. I have so many notes on like things that are happening, and I guess we should mention that this is a spoilery podcast. So if you guys are not wanting spoilers, this is only the first 30% of the book, 35% of the book. But if you guys don't want any spoilers, now is the time for you to exit the room.
Yeah, it's been nice to have you, but we no hard feelings if you want to leave.
I think that my favorite thing so far has been the little pieces of the guidebook that are implemented and how they
Mhm.
connect to a lot of the a lot of the characters that we've run across so far. It also supplying some rules for the wasteland, some things to watch out for, weird circumstances that had happened. We also had a character at one point in time mention that there are a whole bunch of different guidebooks, but this particular one, written by Valentine Rostov, um, is the one that's like thought to be the best of its kind. And so I think that's been my favorite part, is like seeing how it pops up in like the characters' heads, and like is repeated by, we have two factions, I guess it should also be said. Sorry, I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent. But we have the crows and the society that both hold information about the wastelands. So the crows are working for the company, which is the Trans-Siberian Company, and they've been very secretive of their like information that they have. They don't want it to really get out. And then we have the society, which were made from a whole bunch of naturalists, and they were shunned from the scientific community because they weren't renowned scientists. And so I find that interesting, the fact that both pieces use this guidebook as, like, I think the crows really don't like the guidebook because they don't want people to know about the wasteland. They don't think people should be informed. And the society, I think, is of two different factions in that at this point in time, whether or not the wasteland should be studied. That was something that we found out at the end of today's chapters, is that there's a schism within the society, that there are now scientists that believe the wasteland should just be left alone. And then there are others that think that it needs to be studied further. And so this guidebook is just in the midst of all of it.
Right, and there's also this interesting connection between at least the society and the crows agree on one thing, which is that if anything, the wastelands should not be interacted with. So, most members of society, one example is the professor, who is someone who's a traveler on the train. He's been on the train numerous times. He has actually become a bit of a mentor, another adjacent parent figure for Wei Wei. He is obviously very intrigued by the wastelands, and he continues to observe it from the train. He takes notes, but that also brings us to a bit of a rogue naturalist on the train, which is Henry Gray, because one of his discoveries ended up, obviously being debunked. He found this fossil of a fetus within, I think it was a manatee of all things, and he was like, "Oh, this is proof that humans, came from God or something like that," and how the manatee has this evolution within it, like it could also become human or something
I think it
really.
was a seal.
A seal. Okay, for some
Yeah.
reason I have manatee on the brain. Yes, a seal of all things. And in the end, they ended up saying, no, this is a fossil from actually like an old sea creature of some sort. So he was a laughing stock. He ran off, and now he's depleted all of his funds. He's at his wits' end. And I think that makes him dangerous because he doesn't have many more options. But he is striving for notoriety, he's striving for prestige. And what he's decided to do is go on this train with the goal of breaking that barrier, exiting the train, taking samples of the wastelands, bringing it onto the train, and then presenting it at this exposition that everyone's prepared for in Moscow. So very dangerous, because he's not only putting his life in danger, but all of the passengers on the train. And specifically because of this vigil, which we're also made aware of, which so between the wastelands and the major cities is this like parallel of walls. And when a train arrives through the wastelands to the next city, you have to have the train sit between the walls for a day, so for 24 hours. And it's basically a precaution to be sure that none of the wastelands has attached itself to the train, that no one is showing any type of signs of like wasteland sickness, which is like a mental sickness. And if any type of wastelands, like, fungus or other type of elements like natural material is found on the train, then it will be sealed. And these passengers have apparently signed a waiver saying that they understand that they will then have, sacrificed their lives, accepting that, for the better of the people in the city, for their safety, that their lives will then be lost, which is kind of terrifying. So not only are these creatures in the wastelands terrifying, but there's also this idea that even if you make it to your journey, your life is not necessarily safe because the company can decide to seal the train completely. And this guy, Henry Gray, who thinks so highly of himself, who I hate to compare him to Darwin because I am not intentionally comparing him to Charles Darwin, but I think that the author, Sarah Brooks, may be trying to make a parallel because Charles Darwin, on his way to the Galapagos, like at that time in his life, he was also very religious. Like I think we always separate science and religion, but like the original naturalists were seeking the environment, seeking, nature in order to prove God's existence. And it seems as though Henry Gray is, a bit preachy. He continues to try to compare things to God and like bring his scientific discoveries to his religion. So I do kind of find that very interesting. So if anything, it's matching the time period that we're in, which is, the late 19th century, about to enter the 20th century.
Yes. So while you're talking, I was actually looking at the quote that was from the guidebook for the like sealing people into the train. So it says, it talks about them being stuck between the walls. They have to stay there for a day. If after this time there is found to be nothing growing on the outside or the inside of the train, it will be allowed to pass through the gates. And if a trace is found of the wasteland's life, the train will be sealed. All inside will sacrifice themselves for the good of the empire. And this is a contract that they had to sign before they could actually get on the train, which
Mhm.
I find it to be ludicrous. And the character that asked about that was the Countess, which I have really
Mm.
enjoyed her, kind of a crotchety old woman who is going to get her way regardless of what other people think. And so, yeah, she just asked the crows, um, is it really something that we're going to be? Is this something that's going to happen? And they had like a canned response. And so once again, we have the company who is towing the company line that I'm not going to give you more information than you need. So, I think they just said that's never happened, or I can't
Yeah, which
remember
is not
exactly.
very comforting. The idea, well, it's
Right.
never happened yet. It's like, okay, but what if it happens this time?
Right.
So interesting. And yeah, they're very much like sinister corporate, right?
Yeah.
They're saying it's for the good of the empire, but in reality, it's like almost like HR. It's like their version of human resources, like
Yeah,
protecting
right.
the company at all costs. And I love the Countess. She's really like quite sharp. I think she's one of those characters where because she's an older woman, because she's rich, she is almost a bit, you know, underappreciated where people don't really realize like she knows what's going on. Like she knows what she's saying. She realizes what strings she's pulling,
Yep.
and her kind of like poking the bear, like poking these crows and them just like turning into robots. And we've also seen that on other places on the train. Like Weiwei, for instance, had to provide a very kind of like practiced response when
Yeah.
Marya was asking questions. So there is this additional interesting theme of, yeah, like protecting the company, capitalist venture, and yeah, like not really caring about if the people on the train are safe, but more so protecting that the company lasts longer, continues to make money, on top of the fact where there was also something they had to sign saying, it's up to you to go see the doctor if you
Yeah.
are having symptoms of wastelands sickness. We are under no responsibility. So one of those again, like, read the fine print, because if something does happen, not our fault, we're fine, which is really frustrating, but also to be expected.
Yeah. I have 2 things that I wanna talk
Sure.
about, and I don't wanna forget. So, one of them, I wanna go back and talk about the wall. But then another thing that you just mentioned reminded me because it happened at the same time. It was when Marya and Weiwei were interacting, and that
Mhm.
is the forgetting.
Yes.
So, I'm gonna start there, and then we'll go back to the wall. So, with the forgetting, when Marya and Weiwei are having this interaction, Weiwei goes to Marya because she wants to see, like, she essentially gets sent there as a servant because this woman came without a maidservant, and that's unusual. And so they send her in lieu to ask if she needs anything. And Maria's like, I don't need your help, but I do have a question for you. And she's like, is it true? Because she wants to find out what happened on the previous trip, because the previous trip is what caused her father's demise. And so she's trying to piece together some things. And this girl, who she recognizes is the child of the train, should probably know some information. And so she says, is it true that you don't remember a thing? And she does give that canned company line. But then after that, there's this very subtle moment where Weiwei says, I'm sorry, I just don't remember. And I find that so fascinating. And I, like, at that point I had written on my notes, does this happen every time we cross the wasteland? Which we then find out later on that that's not the case. It was just the last trip that they did, that everyone on the train lost their memories. The entire crew, um, there was a description of what happened to some people's brains, because it was like some people came back from it and they don't remember the trip at all, but then they now lead normal lives with kind of a hollow in their mind where the memories should
Mm.
be. But then other people, it was like their brain was a kaleidoscope and everything, a swirling mass of chaos that they never came back from. So that part is very fascinating to figure out, like, what happened on this last trip. And they keep also going back to the fact that the last trip is something that they probably shouldn't be traveling right now. Like, this is
Mhm.
not a trip that the train is ready for.
Yes, and, I love it, it's so fun. Like, first of all, the fact that, yeah, that poor Weiwei, this honestly, this child who is so confident, so, brave, where she isn't really nearly as afraid as some people, because she's like, "The train is my home, like, this is my normal," and yet she still is quite unsettled by the fact that she doesn't remember things, so that is quite impactful, and the little snippets that do flash back to her memory, I think there was a description of someone scratching at the glass and like there being like blood or something, or blood spatter. And speaking of, to like kind of expand upon just the environment of the train, like just as like the grand scope, the memories that she's had on past occasions where the Wastelands has impacted people. For instance, there was one specific description of a strange color yellow that was so unsettling it
Yeah.
caused people nausea. And so, if a passenger happened to accidentally look up and see through the window this color yellow, whether it was somehow mixed in between the branches of a tree or wherever it was, they would suddenly fall ill. And it's just one of those things where, yep, that happened one time. And it's not as though it's repetitive. It's not like they can
Right.
prepare their next passengers for this. It seems like every train journey is different. And we're also seeing these strange creatures like the crawlers. That was
I
gross.
know.
Yeah, like that was really gross. And I'm just really impressed by this author. And I don't know if we've mentioned it in this episode yet, but the fact that she's a debut novelist and she's providing these really eerie descriptions, both of the environment outside the train, as well as just the tension as each character is interacting with each other, you can feel how ominous it all is. And it's really beautiful. There's also some really great imagery throughout, specifically the theme of iron. I have been obsessed. Every time iron is mentioned, I am just like, oh, I wish I could underline this book, but it's a library book, so I
I
can't.
know.
It's like, rats. For instance, the first image I remember was even just the description of the train tracks being built. It was described as an iron thread through the wastelands. And I was like, ooh, that's gorgeous. I love that. And then later on, Marya, I can't remember the circumstances, but she bites her lip. I think it was when the train begins to move, when they start their journey, and she tastes blood. And then she said something about iron. I'm going to have to actually look at it because I did pull that quote. So just give me a second. Okay, so I found it. It was in chapter 1 because she's the first perspective we actually get. And it says, iron to keep us safe. And I loved that because a lot of times when when a person tastes blood, it's described as you can taste the iron of it. So the fact that she bit her lip, tastes blood, and then iron to keep us safe is also the mention of obviously like an homage to the train tracks being made of iron. And at the time, the walls, which are made of stone, are fortified by iron. And also the train is. So we're just seeing these mentions of we're just seeing these mentions of iron, and even the guards, the soldiers, were wearing iron masks to protect them. So it suggests that iron keeps the wastelands at bay. I know that Wei Wei, in that same discussion that you brought up earlier with Marya when they first interact, Wei Wei seemed skeptical. She was saying a lot of people think iron is what keeps us to our reality, but she was saying, I think that it's like, what did she say? Like
It's the
color,
glass
like
marble.
vibrance.
And then,
Yeah,
yeah,
like a
the
vibrant
vibrance that
color.
pulls your eyes. They pull your eyes away from what
Right,
you're
and so
looking at.
a great example was the marble, which was also lovely because Marya recognized the marble as being her father's creation, Anton Ivanovich, the glass worker, the glass engineer who was responsible for creating strong enough glass on the train's windows to prevent the wastelands from getting in. But of course, we know that he was blamed for the fact that 10 months ago, the glass cracked. Now, is that true? Is the company protecting itself? As we've already mentioned, they're very ready to do. Or was there something else at play here? So there's still a lot of mystery going on as far as like who to trust. Obviously, I don't trust the company
Yeah.
because they're a bunch of liars. But I am intrigued by the setup, and there's like so many questions that we have.
And you actually gave me a little bit of a perfect segue whenever you mentioned the soldiers and their helmets, because
Perfect.
I do want to talk about the wall. And there's just like a little smidgen of, there are a couple of things I want to mention about it. The first thing is the soldiers that are made to protect the wall. And they have 10 that face the direction of the community and 10 that face I think it was 10 that face the direction of the
I
wastelands.
think so too.
And they talk about how, like in the train, there was this because they started in Beijing, and when they get to this wall, one of the people was discussing how the soldiers are honored. They should feel honored because they get to protect their community or and protect the people within these cities. And then someone was like, "Well, I bet they don't feel very honored whenever they have nightmares and they like all these things happen to these soldiers that have so much direct contact with the wastelands." And or it's not direct contact, but like closeness to the wastelands. And then we also have them talking about the garrison ghost, which I'm curious to find out more about that.
Yes.
So supposedly there's some type of urban legend about a garrison ghost. And then to tie into all of that, the walls, there are people who will not live next to the walls, will not talk about the walls, will not talk about the wasteland. And that comes back to that religion aspect where it's it's religion tied to superstition because
Mhm, mhm.
a lot of people in this are super superstitious. And it was really fun to see like there are people whose houses are so far, they have to be far enough away that they can't even hear the train. They don't want to see the wall because it's a bad omen.
Yeah, and you do see that superstition, the patterns, people kind of holding charms. There's also a few, like, what are they called? There are certain sections on the train where people can, like, leave, trinkets. What's that called? When there's, like, a god or, like, a saint,
Or
and they
like
have
you're leaving an offering.
an offering, but what's the thing called that you're leaving an offering at? Why can't I
An
remember?
altar.
An altar, oh my gosh, okay. So, yes, there's an altar, there's 2 altars, I think, on the train, or at least there's one that's being used by 2 different groups of people, and I
They,
think one of them was Saint Matilda,
they
and
might
then
have
the
used
other
the word
one,
shrine.
what'd you
Maybe
say?
they might have used
Yeah,
the word
altar,
shrine.
shrine.
Yeah,
It's probably it's probably a word that we can,
interchange.
use interchangeably for this because, yeah, I think that one of them was Saint Matilda?
And that
Yes,
was where the
Saint Matilda.
soldier or the passenger left, or it was a crew member, right? And they left the little bead.
Yeah, a crew member left the little bead, and actually, though, along with Saint Matilda, there's Yuan Guan, which is apparently like a statue of another kind of like saint-like figure, and I think that pulls in the fact that because we are traveling from Beijing to Moscow, we are juggling multiple cultures,
Yes.
multiple languages, and different types of beings that one might pray to, that one might seek protection, for this journey, because there's like Russian being used, there's English being used as well, because the Trans Siberia Company, to my knowledge, is technically an English company that has established itself because it's associated with like the Silk Road and imports exports through that way. So we do have English and we also have Chinese. And what I love about that is you are seeing the language being thrown about as well as like various religious beliefs. But we have like Weiwei, for instance, interchangeably using Russian and using Chinese. A 16-year-old, I'm just so impressed. And there's also this negative, connotation towards the use of Railwa, which is a combination of all three languages. But of course, the staff on the train, they all utilize it because they come from all different places. And I love that though, because you do see the combination of different languages that we see, in modern times. I mean, people talk about Konglish, which is Korean and English together. There's also the combination, a lot of times we see like French being used in mixture of like Caribbean languages. So it's quite fun when I'm seeing it being used on paper here. And I'm someone who loves linguistic things, like anything with language. I'm like, this is my cup of tea. So that's super fun. But I agree with you. Sorry to go on that tangent, but I agree with you that there is this really fascinating balance between religious beliefs and, hard science. Like that really is something that shines through and how each character processes it. Some prefer to stay in one area and others try to blend the two together. But I think it was Marya's mother who was the most obviously trying to like pretty much not talk about the wasteland. She
Yeah.
almost suggested that it was like against their religion to even want to talk about it, like that we're, associating it with the devil. So yeah, very, very interesting there. The one thing that I do want to make sure we don't miss is that this journey is also odd because they're taking the journey in summer. I really love the description of that because typically they say that it's safer for the train to travel in winter because the cold weather seems to dampen the wastelands, apparently, almost as if it goes into hibernation. But for some reason, I will also be interested to see if there is a reason for why the train went when it did. It's described as being too close to summer. So the wastelands are way too active, meaning that the train has decided to go at like peak danger season. So that's crazy. And we are kind of seeing that, aren't we? Even like with the tides, that was a weird scene where they were
Yes.
afraid of the lake.
Actually, speaking of the lake, let's talk about this.
Let's talk about it.
So I think that's another one of my favorite things that has happened so far in the book has been the bringing about of Elena.
Yes.
So we have Wei Wei, who, being the child of the train, has come to understand that there are a whole bunch of different nooks and crannies in the train because she lives on the train. And so she wants places where she can be isolated and not have people know where she's at. So she has a hiding place that is in a false ceiling that is used for smuggling purposes. And she goes up one day, and I remember vividly this thing was described as having inky eyes. She was like,
Mm,
inky eyes were staring at me, but she took it as throughout the wastelands. Anytime people travel on the wastelands, especially the first day, people will have nightmares or they'll have hallucinations, and sometimes they're real, sometimes they're just the anticipation of traveling across these wastelands. And the crew of the ship, especially the younger people in the crew, will make fun of you if you are not holding yourself well, if you're being a scaredy cat. And so
mm.
she convinces herself that these inky eyes that she saw in this place, this crawl space essentially, were fake and that she just imagined it. Well, then she later brings a cat who I believe's name was Dima.
Yes, Dima. How did it take us this long to talk about the cat, by the way? Like, I'm so glad we finally can talk about it.
I was so scared for Dima because she talks about how he was a stowaway. He was very skinny whenever he came on. The crew started feeding him and he just hunts mice. And so he also lives on the train. And so she kind of has a kindred soul with
Mhm.
Dima. And she grabs him and she's like, you're going to come and you're going to help me with this, crawl space to see if, I'm not being overly dramatic thinking that there's something up there. And he instantly has a visceral reaction to this space. He puffs all up. He
Yeah.
hisses, he growls, he has this horrible like moaning sound that comes from him, and eventually he abandons her and he's like, "Nope, peace
Good
out."
for him. Yeah, protect yourself, Dima.
And then the part that and I'm glad that it's now been confirmed that what I had the suspicion of has been confirmed, was that this person is not normal, because she
No.
says that this person formed out of shadows. Like all of a sudden
Mhm.
there was a person that was literally pieced together by the shadows in this crawl space. And it's this child whose name, according to her, is Elena. And yeah, so I guess before I move on to like what we now know, what were your initial thoughts of it, Elena?
Yeah, I immediately was suspicious as well, especially because like the description of her wearing this like very strange silk, like blue silk outfit. And when Wei Wei was trying to figure out how to communicate with her, she was like, okay, let me speak Chinese first. Okay, no, let me speak Russian. And then the way that she described Elena's Russian was like kind of old and rustic. Like it seemed like of a different time. And I was like, okay, this girl is not only a girl. And then of course later on, we see that strange scene in which in that this was crazy when Wei Wei is searching for her, right? Because they end up befriending, or Wei Wei basically just is torn between revealing this stowaway, telling the captain and telling the rest of the staff that she's there, or protecting her, keeping her safe. And originally, in that first interaction that you were describing, she basically tells Elena, don't go anywhere. And Elena's like, okay, I'll stay where I am. And then the next time Wei Wei goes to find her, she describes it as she enters the bathroom because she realizes that Elena has found her way down, on the main floor of the train. And she sees water coming from underneath the door. And I think she said it was tinted red, which is, of course, scary. That's a scary color to see in water. And when she opens the door, she describes it as finding a drowned girl in the bath. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, okay, the murders happened, but this is weird because I thought that Elena wasn't a human. And then like Elena, it's as if she comes back from the dead and is completely not even, yeah, her eyes are popping out open. And when she grabs Wei Wei, it's as if she's pulling Wei Wei down rather than Wei Wei helping her out. And also when she's trying to, clear the bath, she finds like mud and earth in the drain. So obviously there's just it seems as though she's otherworldly, and then that's actually where the book ends, or not the book, but our section for today ended with another scene in which Wei Wei puts two and two together and realizes, oh, she's not quite a girl. But I love it because we also have heard of someone else having seen a not quite girl. So it's just we're seeing all these layers and they're connecting, and it's great. Do you want to talk about that part?
Sure. So yeah, in the we know that in the guidebook there was a moment in time where um, Valentine is describing this lake, which we do get to visit in today's pages, and we had the tides that were affecting the train and all of that. And throughout the process to go through this lake, there is a waterfall that goes through rocks, and he claims that he saw this girl, black-eyed, in this silk dress among the water out in the wastelands. And so we do make this connection that this is the same creature that he saw. And it was before, I think that was in his like version of the guidebook before he
Yeah.
stopped. Like he ended up not making another version. His brain or his what happened to him? He
He
uh
disappears. It's very
yeah,
they're very ominous and kind of mysterious about what actually happened to him.
yes.
People just kind of say that he disappeared, but the guidebook was published in 1880. So that means it's 1899. It's been 19 years. This same girl doesn't seem to have aged at all. Uh, yeah, very creepy.
Yeah. And this also leads us to the water, the crisis of the train. So you were talking about how Elena was in the bathtub and there were all these, like she flooded the bathtub in this really weird scene with her. And now we know that the tides,
Mhm.
like when they struck the train and caused the train to move about, it caused some damage to the train, which they're not used to. But they're now worried that they are leaking water and they have a limited reserve of water. There is a well somewhere in the wastelands. They could potentially stop and get more, but it's definitely not going to be enough. So they are already talking about rationing water. And I know it's going to be absolutely nuts because you also have kind of a caste system within the train as well. You have third class, second class, and first class. And I can see this becoming like an all out brawl between the privileged versus the people who are not.
Oh, for sure. People choosing to, yeah, like maybe save things for themselves, lie, especially if first class ends up getting, special treatment. We may see the third class compartment members, rebelling, possibly trying to take over the train. I think there's just a lot of tension in the air. And what a great place to end this
I
section, by the way.
know.
And I think that all was realized in the final chapter of this section. Wei Wei hearing from Alexei, who's also important because he isn't basically the insider that Henry Gray has working with him to do a dangerous thing and obviously try to collect samples from the wastelands. So my initial question was though, Wei Wei, because of what she knows, her limited knowledge, we know more than Wei Wei. We know more than each of these characters because we're in all of their heads, which is amazing. But Wei Wei only has experiences with this not quite girl, Elena. So she thinks Elena is the cause for this water shortage. It's her fault that they're having a disaster, that the train's going to have to slow down to save power and then slow down even further, possibly even stopping to utilize this well. So even more danger. So Wei Wei is thinking that Elena's the culprit because of her, stint in the bath. Meanwhile, because this information is coming from Alexei, I'm wondering if he did something to the pipes because he had told Henry Gray, don't worry, I'll figure out a way to make the train slow down so that you could get out, get your samples, and get back in. So I feel like there's multiple possible reasons
Yeah.
for why the pipes are actually, corrupted in some way. And of course, obviously, the grander reason that we're going to be telling all of the passengers, I'm sure, is that it's the wave. So it'll be interesting to find out what actually the cause is. Did Alexia do it, or did Elena do it with her, strange abilities? But honestly, we could talk all day about just this first third of this book, which is honestly phenomenal. I'm so excited. I can't wait to keep going. So let's try to wrap this up and answer a few, important topical questions. One, what is going to be our current rating prediction? Like, where do we think we're going to be setting this up? What's our favorite character so far? And then, what question or questions might we have still going forward that we just haven't had time to really dig into today? How about you go first, Danny?
Well, I think that right now it's giving me 5-star ratings. Like, 5-star vibes all around. I'm really enjoying it. I think there's so many details, so many nitty-gritty things. I mean, I have pages and pages of notes. So you are correct that we could be here all day talking about this. So I'm ecstatic though. I'm having a lot of fun. I think the setting is just amazing. Yeah. So definitely 5-star vibes for me. My favorite character, I would say, is Wei Wei. I just find her
Mhm.
very intriguing. I like the fact that she's lived her entire life on the train and doesn't really have any other perspective than that. It's just, I don't know. I find her very fascinating. I also just like her attitude and the fact that she's a teenager, but she also, I don't know. She offers a very different viewpoint from a lot of our other characters that we have. And
Mhm.
then lastly, a question that we did not get to discuss today that I am intrigued by is Artemis. So I want to know, who is Artemis. So just a little bit of a sneak peek for those of you in the audience if you haven't read the book yet. Artemis is a character who has been writing about the Wastelands and giving information to the general public about the Wastelands for years, and they can't figure out who they are. And so we are in the midst of this mystery, a lot of mysteries, but that is one that I still have a question about.
Yes, that is a great point. I'm glad you brought up Artemis. So for me, I agree. This feels like a 5-star read for me. It feels so sure that I'm like, oh my gosh, I hope nothing goes wrong. I can't even imagine how my rating would change at this point because I love the writing. I'm really fascinated by the characters, and it's such a fresh novel that pulls a lot of classic things,
Yeah.
but kind of ties it up in a fresh kind of bow. And then my favorite character is Wei Wei as well. I love her origin story. There is, obviously probably it's almost like a bit of folklore surrounding it. For instance, the fact that she was fine, and obviously she was born on the train, but when they arrived and the train stopped moving, that's when she started crying because she had never realized that the world isn't always in movement, and she just is so connected to this train. It's really beautiful to see her on the page and her perspective when she's observing other characters, because her worldview is so different because she only knows the train, she only knows movement, she only knows the wastelands. So I agree, she's fascinating. I can't wait to continue to see her. Obviously, like, she's my favorite perspective so far. And then finally, my question is this captain, the captain of the
Oh,
train.
yeah.
Right? So she is a woman, and there is this another kind of origin story about her, is that she supposedly, cropped her hair as she was a young boy, made her way through the ranks, tricked everyone into thinking she was a man. As soon as she became a captain, she revealed to all that she is actually a woman, and they couldn't do anything about it. And so she's this really powerful woman figure. Wei Wei clearly looks up to her because this captain has another acted as another kind of adjacent parent, but there also seems to be this strange aloofness going on where Wei Wei has been so used to seeing the captain interacting with her. And now the captain is kind of keeping her at a distance, keeping everyone at a distance, where she's not really being seen very often outside of her cabin. She is at this one dinner, but we still don't get a huge glimpse of her. So I'm wondering what is going on there. There must be more because this captain keeps being mentioned as this kind of like, she even has some like folklore surrounding her where the other staff members are like, you talk about her and suddenly she's there, like she's always listening. So there is some intimidation, some like almost like magical realism going on throughout these pages, even as we're in a very fantasy world. But I want to know more about her.
Well, with that, we are done with our discussion for this week. But remember, you guys can join us next week to read the next third. We're going to be reading parts 3 and 4. We're going to go further into the wastelands and see what other mysteries are revealed, who gets murdered, who stays alive, what happens. So make sure and pick up your books and read with us. We would love to have a discussion with you as well. If you have anything to add, remember our connections are always listed in the description. So feel free to email us your thoughts if you have any additional things to say. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Not Reading for Content. Be sure to check out the description for a schedule of our upcoming reads for this season. For reminders and other updates, you can follow the podcast on Instagram at Not Reading for Content. Where else can the listeners reach you, Leandra?
I have a booktube and a bookstagram. My booktube is Leandra the TBR0, and my bookstagram is at Leandra _ the TBR0. How about you, Danny?
I actually have the same, a booktube and a bookstagram. Both of them can be found at danny.dabbles. Thanks again for listening. Don't forget to tune in next Friday for our next episode.